Welcome back. A major shift is underway with one of the biggest unions in the country. After decades spent in the Democrats' pocket, the Teamsters are now pouring money into the GOP. The Teamsters, like so many other working class Americans, have seen how radical the left has become. They realize that much of the party no longer represents them, and the focus on woke progressive policies, well, it has not made their lives any better. It's only made it worse. And we saw this union shift happening during the election, Brian. We talked about it a lot. We covered it a lot. Still, top members, union bosses, supported the Democrats. But rank and file really started to part ways because they saw under the Biden administration that all the things they were promised were never delivered.
Yeah, Sean O'Brien seems smart in the sense that he's listening to the people in his union, and he's saying, my union members are not as monolithically Democrat as union leaders are. And so he's paying attention to them, and he's doing it in places where you have heavy union presence, and but you have a populace willing to elect a Republican. I mean, Pete Stauber is from Minnesota. He's one example. He's on this list. Teamsters are giving him money. He's up in kind of northeast Minnesota, which is traditionally very Democratic, very blue collar. But he's a Republican because he's a smart Republican because he said, I care about working people, and I know you don't care. I know that you don't like when men play women's sports. I know that you don't like when your tax dollars are used to pay for sex changes for minors, right? It's a very simple thing. And union members who have traditionally gone left have said, yeah, I want somebody who can talk sense in economics and who can talk sense on all the other issues. The Republicans have sort of navigated that, and now increasingly I think unions are having to navigate that same thing.
And we talked earlier about how in Silicon Valley, rank and file may be breaking from leadership now. So you see some weird parallels here. They're not exactly alike, but you basically see how leadership and the makings up of a company or a union or whatever the organization is, Lou, can be very, very different. But we're seeing these shifts that are really palpable, and they have an impact. And that's why I bring up the Silicon Valley example on the other side.
Yeah, I think it's a question of, is this an early indicator or just an anomaly, right? If we go back to the election, the interesting thing to me is you could tell where the election was going early on based upon Florida County voting switches. Early voting, you saw in 2016 that went heavily Trump, flipped back to Biden in 2020, and then the early voting showed them changing tides and coming back to the Republican Party. So I think this is an indicative of that shift that's happening. But to Brian's point, too, I think it's also listening. It's effective listening, right? Remember, what did the voters want in the presidential election? Immigration, border safety, and the economy were two things that were top of their list. And you're talking about candidates now, unions gravitating toward people that are talking common sense and listening to what they care about and making that the cornerstone of their campaigns.
Well, and that's my biggest gripe with the Biden-Harris administration, because they would say, we're going to help the working class, which includes union members, and they did anything but help the working class. So eventually people start to look at policy and say, you know, you're not putting food on my table. I got to go with the guy who is going to help me do that.
I think it's two things. The Republicans have won over more and more of the Teamsters, the union voters, but they've been helped so much by the Democrat Party that's gone so far left with all these radical policies that the average person just doesn't relate to. And I think that's continuing because the Democrats still do not have a platform. They don't even have a leader. What do they stand for? They don't even know. And I think all of that is, of course, to the advantage of the Republicans who keep chipping away to be the party of the working class, because the Democrats certainly aren't.
Lydia brought that up in a previous conversation in our previous hour about how the lack of proper messaging from the Democrats actually gives Mondami an opening to flourish in this particular environment, because he flashes that smile and does the social media thing and goes out and shakes some hands, and all of a sudden they're gravitating towards him.
Yeah, he's not their success story. He's like an example of their failure, I think. I think that unions, though, generally are in a fight for their life. It's existential, because if you just look at the data, their membership is dwindling. I mean, BLS just put out data recently that says last year membership nationwide dropped to 9.9%, so under 10%. This is a historic low, down from last year. And when you compare that to like 40 years ago, it was roughly 20% of the workforce that was unionized. And when you break that apart a little bit more, the private sector, we're at a historic low for union membership. We're at 5.9%. very low. Still a stranglehold on the public sector jobs. It's over 30%. So more than roughly 1 in 3 public sector workers are a member of a union, which goes back to the whole DOGE thing. Shrinking the federal workforce shrinks union membership
Right.
and stranglehold,
That's
especially when you
true,
think
too.
about the Department of Education. So when you hear about Sean O'Brien pivoting, and I go out and I cover issues like the U.S. Steel Workers or the port strike, and I talk to membership, the union bosses are doing the smart thing because they're asking themselves, why is our membership dwindling? They flex hard and they talk a big game under the Biden administration because they knew they had power, because they knew that the union bosses that Biden would do whatever the union bosses would say. But that's not the case anymore. So Sean O'Brien is reading the room and playing the cards right, and he's saying, listen, we got to be more accommodating to a conservative, smart worker.
If your union relies on a private sector business, then you've got to figure out how to help the private sector thrive.
Right.
If your union relies on taxpayer money through the government, those are the most far left unions, the ones that are government unions, because they don't have to worry about their money and they don't have to worry about their jobs, and they just tap into taxpayer money to push their agenda. So it's interesting to see the private sector unions, I think, adapting faster because they're under private sector, the tough hand of the market that makes them change.
I still
Threat's
think
that much more existential
it all
to
comes
them.
down to money. And, we've been talking as a theme on the program about how things have become the affordability crisis in the sort of rise of this Mondami character and why he's resonating with people. But Trump also seized on that too. And we've mentioned their solutions to the affordability crisis are very different. But as competition continues and it just gets harder and harder to make it in this world and to feel like you're getting ahead, I feel like union membership is looking and saying, who's going to bring the manufacturing jobs back?
Yep.
Joe Biden didn't do that for us, even though he promised us that he would. Who's trying to crush the middle class? Joe Biden said that he was a middle class guy growing up and that he wanted to strengthen the middle class, but actually it shrunk. And as we see characters like Mondami gain more of a foothold, you're going to see that polarization between extreme elite wealthy and everybody else. You're going to see that gap widen with no middle class in between. And so I think they're just waking up to seeing what the tea leaves are and saying, I don't want to go down that road. I want to stick with the party that's going to preserve my job and make sure that, we'll still be here and we'll be able to make it.